All right. You ready to dive into some seriously big questions today? We're talking creation, consciousness, the nature of the self, the really big stuff.
The kind of stuff that keeps you up at night.
Yeah, exactly. And from the looks of the sources you sent over, you've been wrestling with some pretty fascinating ideas.
It's a pretty interesting mix. Your own reflections from meditation, that CRT 1.8 excerpt from the Corbin Bible. A lot to unpack.
It's like you've got your own philosophical mystery box going on, but that CRT 1.8 passage, that seems to be the key for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. CRT 1.8, it all centers around this eternal essence. And it's not a God, in the traditional sense. It's more fundamental, timeless even.
Not a dude with a beard on a cloud, got it. So, what? Like the raw potential of everything before anything actually exists?
Exactly. Pure potential. Just imagine that for a second. And the text, it describes this essence as existing in a state of rest, which it calls a desire of loneliness.
Desire of loneliness. That's a heavy one. Sounds kind of, lonely, doesn't it?
It did stop me in my tracks the first time I read it, that's for sure. But it's not about being physically alone. Not really. It's more about that state of pure potential before anything exists. Think of a still lake. Totally undisturbed.
Full of possibility, but it hasn't become anything yet.
Exactly. That's the desire of loneliness.
Okay, so we've got this eternal essence just hanging out, full of potential. What happens next? How do we get from pure potential to, you and me having this conversation?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. CRT 1.8, it says that from this desire of loneliness, an external voice emerges.
Hold on, external voice. Like, are we talking a literal voice here? Is Morgan Freeman narrating the universe into existence?
Not quite. Remember, this text is deeply symbolic. Think of this external voice more as like the first stirring of creative energy, that first ripple that disturbs the stillness.
Okay, so more like the universe clearing its throat. I like
Sure.
it. And this ties into your meditation reflections on the self, right?
Absolutely. This insight you had, you are not your thoughts, and your voice speaks outside of your thoughts. That's huge.
It was a big aha moment for me, for sure. I was meditating, thoughts swirling around, and it hit me. There's a part of me just observing all of that, totally detached. And then I thought, if I'm not my thoughts, then what is this I that's witnessing them?
Exactly. And you connected that to the idea of a creator existing outside of its creation, which that's not a new concept. You see it in a lot of spiritual and philosophical traditions. But there's also a fascinating parallel in a very different field. Quantum physics.
Oh, quantum physics. Now you're speaking my language. Tell me more.
So in quantum physics, there's this thing called the observer effect. Basically, it suggests that just by observing something, we can actually influence how it behaves.
Wait, just by looking at something, we change it. Okay, now you have to explain that one.
It's wild, right? It's like our consciousness itself plays a role in collapsing possibilities into the reality that we perceive.
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to wrap my head around that one. So how does this connect back to the eternal essence and that external voice from CRT 1.8?
Just as the observer in those quantum experiments can have an effect on what's being observed, think about your inner observer. That part of you that's aware of your thoughts, but not defined by them, that part of you can influence your own reality too.
Okay, that's a powerful way to think about it. But if we're not our thoughts, then what exactly is that external voice, that creative impulse? How does it actually create?
Well, if we're thinking of the voice metaphorically, as a pure creative energy.
Which, by the way, I love that metaphor. It's way more interesting than some old guy with a staff.
Right. So this voice, it's not bound by time or language as we understand it. It's not creating with words, but with the very fabric of existence itself.
So less about dictating the details and more about setting the stage, creating the conditions for everything else to happen.
Precisely. The external voice establishes the framework for creation. Think of the Big Bang, not as this one-time event, but as this ongoing expansion from a point of pure potential. And actually, that brings us to another idea you were exploring in your research.
You mean the idea that creation isn't a one-and-done deal, that it's an ongoing process, because that really resonated with me.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Stoic idea of eternal recurrence. It basically suggests that the universe goes through these endless cycles of creation and destruction.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. It's like, what if existence isn't a straight line, but more like a circle or maybe a spiral even?
Exactly. And then there's samsara in Hindu cosmology. That's the continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
And it's so interesting, right? Because even though they come from such different traditions, both of those ideas, they point towards this idea that everything is connected. It's all in flux.
Exactly. And when you look at CRT 1.8 through that lens, It adds a whole new dimension, doesn't it? The eternal essence. It's not creating just once. It's continuous, maybe even infinite.
It's like breathing, right? Inhale, exhale, this endless cycle. So much more dynamic, but the cyclical time thing, that kind of throws a wrench into things, doesn't it? Does that mean there's no such thing as a beginning? And what about our concept of linear time? How does that fit in?
It seems like your research has led you to question the very nature of time. And from what I've seen, you found some pretty compelling stuff on that very subject.
Always down the rabbit hole. But maybe before we get too far ahead of ourselves, you can shed some light on how our human perception of time, how limited it is, might be keeping us from really grasping the true nature of creation.
It can definitely be a lot to take in. It's something that even the most brilliant minds throughout history have struggled with. Maybe a few analogies might help.
Analogies are my love language. Let's hear them.
Okay, so imagine you're an ant, right? Walking on a vinyl record. You experience the world as this straight line, yeah. But someone looking at the whole record, they see the circular groove, the needle moving through it.
So we're the ant, focused on our own little track, while the bigger picture of time is unfolding all around us. I like that.
Precisely. Now imagine that someone takes a pair of scissors and cuts the record into 1,000,000 tiny pieces. Each piece, that's like a different moment in time. But they're all part of the same song, the same story.
Okay, I'm with you. But what happens to the song if you start rearranging the pieces?
That's the question, isn't it? Does time even make sense if you jumble up all the pieces?
Maybe it just becomes a remix. A little less predictable, open to interpretation.
Exactly. And maybe that's a more accurate way to understand time than just a straight line.
Okay, so we've got ants on records and cosmic remixes. What other mind-blowing analogies have you got up your sleeve?
Well, your research also mentioned the multiverse theory, which that offers a really interesting perspective on time and creation. But I think maybe we should say that for our next segment.
You're killing me. Fine, you've piqued my curiosity. But next time, we are diving headfirst into the multiverse.
All right, the multiverse. One of those ideas that really makes you question everything you thought you knew.
Don't hold back. That's my kind of topic. But just to refresh my memory, what exactly is the multiverse theory?
Okay, so in the simplest terms, it suggests that our universe might not be the only one.
Hold on. There's more than one.
There could be countless other universes, each one with its own set of physics, its own history.
Oh, okay. So not just parallel universes, but a whole multiverse, like a cosmic web of realities, each one branching off and doing its own thing.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting when we think about time, because one of the biggest challenges we have when we're thinking about the beginning of everything is that our human brains, we're hardwired to think about time as linear, past, present, future, a straight line.
Totally. Even when I try to picture something without a beginning, my brain wants to put one there.
Of course. It's natural. But the multiverse throws a wrench in that. See, if there are all of these different universes, each with their own Big Bang, their own timeline,
then maybe there isn't one single beginning to everything.
Exactly.
So instead of a starting line, it's more like fireworks, a bunch of big bangs going off at different times, creating a whole shower of sparkling universes.
You got it. And some of those universes, maybe they're eternal, some might be finite, each one playing by a different set of rules.
Makes your head spin, but in a good way. So with each universe having its own timeline, what happens to our idea of a shared history? Does that even exist in the multiverse?
That's a great question. And it's not just our understanding of beginnings that gets challenged, but also the nature of time itself. What if time isn't actually a straight line like we perceive it?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Keep going.
What if time is something much more complex, something multidimensional?
I love where this is going. I've always been fascinated by the different ways people think about time. Remember that book I sent you about different cultures and their perceptions of time?
Absolutely. It's fascinating stuff. And, a lot of cultures have these beliefs about time that actually resonate with these more recent scientific theories. Take the indigenous Australian concept of dream time, for example. The past, present, and future, they're all interconnected.
It's like we're just seeing this tiny sliver of the full picture, like one of those optical illusions where what you see depends on how you're looking at it.
Exactly. Imagine looking at a tapestry, but you're looking at the back of it. All you see are knots, maybe some loose threads. But if you could somehow flip it over,
you see the design, the full picture.
Exactly. Maybe that's what we're tapping into during those really deep meditations, those mystical experiences. We get these little glimpses of the full tapestry of time and existence. But we have to be careful not to get too caught up in the enormity of it all. You're also thinking about what this means for us as individuals, right?
Yeah, because if the universe is this mind-blowingly huge and complex thing, it's easy to feel kind of insignificant.
Yeah.
Like the universe is a beach. What am I? Just a grain of sand.
It's a pretty common feeling. But what if you're not just a grain of sand?
Okay, now you have to explain that one.
What if you're something more? Something actually integral to the beach itself?
All right, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
I'd love to, but I think this is the perfect time to move on to the next mind-blowing concept. The timeless self. Ready to go even deeper?
Always. Lay it on me. All right, timeless self. You've got to elaborate on that one because it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. Are we about to get into time travel? Immortality?
Well, maybe not in the literal sense, but it's just as mind-blowing, I promise. Remember that feeling you described in your meditation notes, that sense of a detached observer witnessing your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Like taking a step back from the hustle and bustle of my own mind and just being aware. It's peaceful, but also kind of awe-inspiring at the same time because it makes you wonder, if I am not my thoughts, then who or what is doing the observing?
Now that is the million-dollar question. It's one that philosophers and mystics have been exploring forever. What if that observer? What if it's not bound by time the same way our physical bodies are? What if it's a glimpse of your timeless self, the part of you that exists beyond all of the constraints of linear time?
So there's a part of me that's connected to something bigger, something timeless. I have to admit, I like the sound of that.
It's a beautiful concept, and it connects back to everything we've been discussing, the nature of creation, the multiverse. Think back to those quantum experiments where just by observing something, the observer influences the outcome.
Yeah, that one blew my mind.
So what if our consciousness, that timeless observer that exists within us, what if it's not just witnessing creation, but actively participating in it?
Wait, so we're not just along for the ride, we are actually co-creating reality.
Exactly. It's like every thought you have, every action you take, it's like a brushstroke on this giant canvas of existence. We are all artists, in a way, contributing to the grand masterpiece, whether we realize it or not.
So instead of feeling insignificant, we should feel empowered. Like we actually have a responsibility to use that creative power, those thoughts and actions intentionally.
Now you're getting it. It's a call to awareness, a call to step into our full potential as conscious participants in this massive cosmic dance. And that's where practices like meditation, that's where they become so important.
It's not just about clearing your head for 20 minutes.
Right. It's about connecting with that timeless self, that source of creativity within, and aligning ourselves with the flow of creation itself.
I am definitely thinking about my meditation practice differently now. It's not just about finding a little peace and quiet. It's about tapping into that infinite creative potential we all share.
Yes. It's about recognizing that we are the universe experiencing itself, not separate from it, but an integral part of its evolution. And honestly, that's a realization that can be incredibly liberating, empowering even.
It's like instead of looking up at the stars and feeling small, we can look up and remember that we're made of the same stardust, driven by that same creative force that sparked the Big Bang.
Perfectly said. And just like that initial spark, our own creative potential, it's limitless. We just have to remember to tap into it.
This entire deep dive has been such a shift in perspective. At the start, I felt like I was lost in this massive, confusing museum. And now I realize I'm part of the exhibit, a living, breathing work of art. And not just me, but everything and everyone around us.
What a beautiful way to put it. And remember, this is just the beginning of the exploration. There's always more to discover, more connections to be made.
That's what makes these conversations so interesting. But I think I might need some time to process all of this. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
When you look up at the night sky, you feel that sense of wonder. What if you could tap into that wonder in every single moment? Because you, my friend, are a walking, talking universe full of endless possibilities. Don't you ever forget that.
That's such a great note to end on. I'm going to be thinking about that one all day. Thanks for taking this journey with us. It's been amazing.
The pleasure was all mine. Keep asking those big questions. Who knows what you'll find?